Welcome to a new time. Welcome to a new era.
This ain't WCW. This ain't Monday Night Raw. This ain't SmackDown. This ain't even WWE.
Feel the wrath of the Pythons. You shall feel the wrath of Hulkamania. This is where the power lies.
And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so.
He put hard times on Dusty Rhodes and his family.
I got a 66 and 2/3 chance of winning because Kurt Angle knows he can't beat me and he's not even going to try.
It's time to step into the squared circle and get it done.
Good evening, good morning, welcome wherever you are listening to this. This is Legends and Champions coming to you from the McGuire on Wrestling Network. You are listening to us on a podcast at McGuire on Wrestling on all good podcast providers. And of course, we are here each and every week. Andy Evans coming to you, not from Weymouth. No, I'm in Reading. I have taped this show and I have also got a bit of a treat coming up for you later on. What are we here to talk about this week? Well, we are going to go back in time, as we always do, and talk about the 1997 Survivor Series. But we're going to talk more than just Montreal. We're going to talk about the card. We're going to talk about the matches. We're going to talk about the event itself. Then we will talk about Bret The Hitman Hart and the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. And I will be joined by Mike McGuire, who will be sharing his opinion on Montreal. This isn't going to be your standard, typical, this is Montreal and this is what happened in the world of professional wrestling. We're going to take a different route, right? Every show, at some point in their career, has talked about Montreal. I've talked about Montreal on my shows. It's been done to death. So let's give the Survivor Series 1997 a bit of love. Because really, what can anybody remember about this card? That's a quiz. Alright. Want to give a big shout out to Mike every Sunday on McGuire on Wrestling. You can listen to it on the podcast feed or on radio if you're in Canada. Check out McGuireOnWrestling.com for more details, and Team MOW on Facebook. I want to give a big thank you to Mike for taking some time out after his busy day doing the breakfast show to join me for Legends. Also want to give a shout out to Mitch and Dimitri from the alternate commentary table, doing a cracking show each and every week. And as always, it's time for our good friend Joe.
Make it sweet, you'll make it short. It's time for Andy's Weather Report. Yeah.
And it's time for my weather report. And I'm going to give you two guesses. What do you think it's currently like where I am? Do you think it's A, cold and wet, B, cold and wet, or C, cold and wet? Just going to give you 30 seconds. Just have a bit of a think. You know. Just you know. Take a second. Think about it. Think about it. Think about it. Time's up. It's cold and wet. You were right. Alright, let's get to it. Let's go and talk all about the 1997 Survivor Series. I'll see you after this.
Hey, yo, how many of you here came to listen to your same generic wrestling podcast? Or how many of you came to listen to the alternate commentary table every single Saturday?
You're going to get our perspective of what the real fans of wrestling think, and no one does it like us.
Subscribe and stream to the McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed anywhere where you're streaming your podcasts. Survey says one more for the Greek guys.
Chair shot.
Let's do it, shall we? Let us talk about the 1997 Survivor Series, because really, This is a card that most people will talk about, that one event that changed the landscape of the WWE and wrestling as a whole. This pay-per-view had intense backstage drama to the unforgettable main event. We will be going through everything. We're going to dig into the build-up, we're going to break down the match card, we're going to give you the observer ratings, and we're going to explore the aftermath that would go on to define the era of Attitude. So let's kick off with our opening contest. Ladies and gentlemen, this following contest is scheduled for one fall. That's my Howard Finkel impression. It was an 8-man elimination tag team match. It was the New Age Outlaws. Oh, you didn't know? Facing off against the Godwins. Facing off against the Headbangers and the New Blackjacks. Of course, if you don't remember who they were, it's Bradshaw and Wyndham. The result were the Outlaws and the Godwins won the match. Meltzer gave it 1.5 stars. And really, this opening contest pitted two heel teams against the face team in the elimination match. But the focus was primarily on the Road Dogg and Badass Billy Gunn, who were gaining quite fast popularity as this young, edgy heel team. In fact, when you take the charisma of the Road Dogg on the mic, the, semi-work rate of Billy Gunn, who had a bad gimmick before with Rockabilly, they needed something. And when you talk about tag team wrestling in the late 1990s, the team that stands out to you are the Outlaws. I remember working for a supermarket here in the UK called Asda. And in America, you'd know it as Walmart. And we had a role which was called a greeter. And the greeter was stood at the front of the store. And they used to do all the annoying tannoy announcements, right? You used to go like, clean up in aisle 6, or buy one, get one free on toilet rolls. And my job as a 16-year-old was to kind of promote. So I remember going up to customer services, getting the tannoy and going, "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, as the Stores Bournemouth proudly brings to you, it's 2 for 1 toilet rolls." It was cheesy, but 16 years old, it got people laughing. And that was because of the Outlaws. That was the influence that the Outlaws were having on pop culture. Everybody was doing it. So leading up to this match, the Outlaws had been working on establishing themselves in the tag division. They had a rebellious and an unpredictable style. And it was only recently that Billy and Road Dogg had started to team up. And they often used underhanded tactics and brash promos to get noticed. The Headbangers, however, were a quirky tag team, known for their grunge-inspired personas. They were surprisingly coming off a run as the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Champions, and they'd been feuding intermittently with Phineas and Henry O. Godwin, who were a rugged country-style tag team that brought this rough, brawling approach to the ring. On episodes of Monday Night Raw prior to the pay-per-view, the teams clashed multiple times, often resulting in chaotic brawls or interference. The Godwins and the Outlaws formed an alliance based on their mutual disdain for the unconventional Headbangers and the serious old-school New Blackjacks. Now, this match served two main purposes. The first was to continue the animosity between the teams and to give the Outlaws more exposure, allowing them to showcase their chemistry as this rising duo in the WWE. And the company, to their credit, used the platform to give each team a moment to shine. Though the focus was more on Billy and Road Dogg, who would go on to have impact in the tag division in the Attitude Era. In fact, it wasn't long after that the Godwins and the Headbangers disappeared from WWE TV. Now, the Blackjacks, however, Barry Windham and JBL, well, Barry Windham didn't do too well in the WWE, but JBL went on to become WWE champion, so he kind of got the rub. Now, the match didn't necessarily stand out in terms of in-ring action, and it was more of this straightforward Survivor Series bout without much build, but it effectively highlighted the characters and gave the crowd a taste of the emerging attitude of the WWE roster. Now bear that in mind. Next up was Team USA, Vader, Goldust, the Wild Man, Mark Mero, and Steve Blackman facing off against Team Canada, which was Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon, and the Hart Foundation's British Bulldog and Jim Neidhart. Now, Meltzer gave this one 2 stars. It was Team Canada winning the match. And really, this was part of the Hitman's larger anti-American storyline. As we all know, and we might touch on it later with Mike, over the previous year, Bret had turned heel in the US. And he was still being celebrated as a hero in Canada, in Germany, in India, and of course right here in the UK. His faction, the Hart Foundation, included his brother-in-law, the British Bulldog, and the Anvil, Jim Neidhart, was central to the feud. Bulldog, Neidhart, Furnas and LaFon were all either Canadian or portrayed as allies of Canada, and the opposing team consisted of all American wrestlers, was led by Big Van Vader, who had recently taken on this more patriotic role following the feud that he had with both The Undertaker and the world's most dangerous man, Ken Shamrock. On Monday Night Raw, these performers clashed in various tag matches, with Team Canada mocking the US and Team USA rallying fans behind them. The divide was deepened even further, however, as Bulldog and Neidhart taunted the crowd with their Canadian loyalty, further cementing their role as anti-American heroes. So why was this match taking place? Well, as we all know, Survivor Series 1997 was held in Montreal, making it the perfect setting to continue this USA versus Canada rivalry. The fierce patriotism for Team Canada from the Canadian crowd added this extra layer of heat, especially as both Davey Boy Smith and Jim Neidhart openly antagonized American fans. Now, the theme of the USA versus Canada had been a huge hit and a huge draw for the WWE, with the Hart Foundation's feud against the popular American teams driving a significant part of the content for Raw's storyline throughout the year. So how did the match go down? It was heated. There's no doubt about that. The crowd were fully behind Team Canada. There were some notable moments, including Vader taking a leadership role for Team USA and Goldust's tense exchanges as he had begun this shift in character, exploring this more darker, more aggressive form of Goldust. As we said, Meltzer gave it 2 stars. It wasn't outstanding from a technical standpoint, but it was a strong crowd pleaser. And much of the excitement came from the crowd's passionate reactions. Now, next up, we moved away from the Survivor Series matches and moved to a single one-on-one. And this was Kane facing off against Mankind. Meltzer gave it 2.75 stars. And this one was all about Kane. Now, it was only a few weeks earlier at Bad Blood in October of 97 that Kane had debuted as the brother of The Undertaker in a moment that has become legendary, because Kane interfered in that first ever Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, ripping the cage door off its hinges and attacking the Dead Man. Now, since that point, the WWE had done one hell of an amazing job to build Kane as this unstoppable, terrifying force, with Paul Bearer revealing that Kane had survived a fire and was back to seek revenge on his brother because he left him for dead. Now, Mankind was known for this chaotic, unpredictable brawling style. He had become one of the most prominent rivals of The Undertaker earlier in that year, in fact, ever. And that feud involved some real brutal encounters, including the infamous Boiler Room Brawl at SummerSlam of 96 and a Buried Alive match. In the weeks leading up to the Survivor Series, Kane targeted Mankind on Raw. He attacked him and he dismantled other superstars, with Mankind stepping up as just one of the few that were willing to face him head on. Now, let's be frank. The WWE had one aim for this match. They wanted to solidify Kane as a monster. And they needed a sacrificial lamb to do this. And that was Mick Foley. Why was it Mick Foley? Because he has a reputation for enduring punishment. He was the perfect choice. But he also, if you look at storyline wise, had this direct connection to The Undertaker, adding a further weight, as fans saw it as a prelude to that eventual Kane versus Undertaker showdown. Little did we know that that would be showdown 1 of 999,000. Now, if you were expecting a catch-as-catch-can technical style match, you were disappointed. It wasn't going to happen. This match was as intense as a brawl as you could get, and Kane dominated much of the offense. But what it did do was it showed Mankind putting up this valiant fight, taking the heavy punishment, showcasing his trademark resilience. Kane's brute strength and aggression were on full display, and he delivered an exceptionally impressive victory. The match solidified Kane's role as a near unstoppable force and garnered 2.75 from Meltzer. Whilst not technically flawless, the intensity and the storytelling made it memorable. Next up was a Survivor Series elimination match, and this time it featured the Nation of Domination, Farouk, D'Lo Brown, Kama Mustafa, and the man who would become The Rock, Rocky Maivia, facing off against Ken Shamrock, Ahmed Johnson, and the Legion of Doom. And it was the team of the LOD, of Ahmed and Ken, that won this match. Meltzer gave it 2.25 stars, and effectively this one was about the Nation, the stable that was led by Farouk, engaged in a storyline in the WWE about power and identity. They were portraying themselves as rebels fighting against the perceived injustice in the WWE. The group, especially with Rocky Maivia, were rising in prominence. They were a formidable faction on Monday Night Raw in an era where stables were all over the place. I mean, if you think about 1997 WWF, you had The Nation, you had Los Boricuas, you had the Disciples of Apocalypse. They were everywhere. In fact, I remember talking to Conrad Thompson years ago about this, and he actually said it was too much, and I agree. There were too many stables in the WWF in 1997, 1998, but at this point, the Nation were the leading stable. They were ahead, in my opinion anyway, for DX. Now, Ken Shamrock, who we all know as the world's most dangerous man, had previously crossed paths with the Nation due to this aggressive and straightforward approach. He was as determined as you could be to take them down. He viewed them as bullies in the landscape of the WWE. Now, Ahmed Johnson had a personal feud with the Nation going back to 1996 when he suffered an injury due to Farouk, and this made him this natural ally in the fight against the faction. The LOD, Hawk and Animal, sadly no longer with us, are the legendary tag team with the WWE, but not just for them, but for professional wrestling, had their own rivalry with the Nation. They clashed multiple times on Raw in various matches, brawls, and confrontations, and it was their intensity and brute strength that made them an ideal partner for both Shamrock and Johnson. And the WWE, again, were very clever with this match. They used it as a way to showcase the tension between the Nation and the other fan favourite babyfaces. It was also a vehicle to allow The Rock, Rocky Maivia, to gain more visibility. He was just starting to develop this heel persona, which would eventually lead him in to becoming The Rock. And also bear in mind that Rocky was getting Die Rocky Die and Rocky sucks chants. You know, he came in as the Blue Chipper just 1 year earlier in 1996 at Survivor Series. And from that point, the fans just turned on him. But it was that turning, that heel turn, that made him the biggest star in professional wrestling. And one of the board members of the WWE and TKO. Funny how things happen. The match, as you would expect, was chaotic and it was hard-hitting. There were standout performances from both Shamrock and Maivia, with Shamrock showcasing his MMA skills with the powerful strikes and the submission moves, eventually leading his team to victory. But it was the growing arrogance of Rocky Maivia and his presence in that ring which were notable, and it was his interactions with the fans and the opponents foreshadowing the charismatic star he would become. As I said, Meltzer gave it 2.25 stars, noting the solid, if unspectacular, in-ring action, but acknowledging its storytelling value. Now we got 2 more matches to touch on before we end this show. And I'm going to take a quick break there, because coming up next, we're going to be talking about a rattlesnake and a man who breaks necks.
If you like McGuire on Wrestling, you need to subscribe to the free McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed. Not only do you get access to the show a day early, but you also get free bonus content every week. Share a laugh with Mitch and Dimitri on the alternate commentary table.
Oh, I'm Cody Rhodes. Look at me.
Now, if this was Damian Priest, he'd apologize.
He probably would have apologized.
Follow along with the film career of one of wrestling's biggest stars with We've Seen a Movie.
Basically, I'm just watching John Cena play his wrestling character.
If John Cena was a raging alcoholic, Atlantic City mooch before this.
Get all these shows, exclusive interviews, and more for free by subscribing to McGuire on Wrestling, wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back with more of Legends and Champions, and this time continuing the action as we look at the Intercontinental Championship match. Stone Cold Steve Austin returning to the WWE to face off against Owen Hart. And it was Steve Austin winning and becoming the new Intercontinental Champion. So why are we here? Well, this match became known for one thing: the result of the pile driver. And the feud between Austin and Owen Hart began several months earlier at SummerSlam in August. During the match, Owen, as we all know, delivered that botched pile driver that injured Austin, causing the neck injury that nearly ended his career. Now, if you don't know what happened, well, the impact of the pile driver compressed Austin's neck and spine, causing a temporary paralysis, effectively a stinger. He couldn't feel anything. And it really did put his wrestling future in jeopardy. And in fact, a lot of people have said, including Austin, he was never the same after that. But the injury, although potentially career-ending, actually marked a turning point in his character. Because despite being physically sidelined, he was able to stay on TV, cut scathing promos, and keep appearing on Monday Night Raw to stoke this rivalry with both Owen and the Hart Foundation. Now bear in mind, Eric Bischoff a few years earlier in WCW had fired him because he said he wasn't skilled enough. He'd then gone to ECW and cut some amazing promos. And now, in the WWE, he was gaining traction as Steve Austin, as Stone Cold. Owen, however, embraced the feud. I mean, real did. And it was classic heel. And I remember I had one of these t-shirts. He made a t-shirt that read, Owen 316, I just broke your neck. This mocked the famous Austin 316 catchphrase, which added further fuel to the rivalry and continued to make Owen one of the top villains. Now bear in mind, we've just talked about 1994. We've just talked about, the Survivor Series of 1994 with what Owen did to cost Bret the championship. We talked about SummerSlam, where it was the steel cage match between Bret and Owen. We talked about the King of the Ring, where Owen became the champion. We talked about WrestleMania 10, where he beat the Hitman Bret Hart. He was already up there as a top heel, and he just continued to grow and develop and evolve. But this match was also about the resilience of Austin. He was determined to regain that Intercontinental Championship despite an injury. So the WWE played up the toughest SOB persona by allowing him to make limited in-ring appearances, emphasizing he wasn't 100%, but he was still willing to fight. And in the weeks leading up to Survivor Series, he made several appearances on Raw, where he literally stunned opponents, referees, and WWE officials. His refusal to back down became a big storyline, and Vince McMahon, already weary of the rebellious nature at Austin, began hinting at tension with him, which ultimately would lead to the McMahon-Austin storyline from 1998, the biggest storyline in professional wrestling. Survivor Series was set. It was where Austin was going to return to in-ring to make his comeback and get a chance to get revenge on Owen for the injury and the disrespect showed afterwards. But there was an X factor, and that was Owen, who was part of the Hart Foundation, the faction that we've already talked about, led by the Hitman and featuring the Bulldog and Jim Neidhart. It was built around pro-Canada, anti-American, and Owen's position within the Hart Foundation added additional weight to the match, as Bret was scheduled for the main event. This was effectively the co-main event of Survivor Series. The Hart Foundation's fate, the fate of Bret and Owen's respective championships, seemed entwined on this night, setting up the Survivor Series as a pivotal moment for the entire faction. And we forget about that because all you do is talk about Montreal. You talk about the Screwjob. We don't talk about the fact that this was the end of the Hart Foundation. And this match was Austin's opportunity to exact revenge on Owen for SummerSlam. The WWE wanted to capitalize on his rising popularity and position him as a top star. Reclaiming the Intercontinental Championship would be a step forward towards cementing him as the dominant force. Just think Diesel. But also, Austin's feud with Owen played into that larger USA versus Canada storyline, with Austin representing the rebellious, anti-establishment American fan base. And with Survivor Series being in Montreal, as we said in Team Canada's match, it heightened the stakes. Austin was booed out of the building from the Canadian crowd, who were loyal to Owen and the Harts. I mean, it was, you talk about Chicago crowds, you talk about New York crowds. This was just a paradox of a crowd. It was weird, but it was amazing to see. The match itself, because of the neck injury, was kept short. It ran for around 4 minutes. The intensity was high, but the WWE were very careful in what they allowed Austin to do. They protected him. They limited the demands to avoid the injury getting worse. And it was from the start that Austin took control, attacking Owen with strikes, playing up the aggressive take no prisoners persona. The crowd's reaction was electric, but the end did come swiftly. Austin reversed an attempted move from Owen, hit him with the stunner. The crowd erupted in boos as Austin pinned Owen for the 3, winning the championship in a decisive but brief. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Meltzer only gave it 1 star. But what you've got to remember is the low rating doesn't capture the significance of this match. Not just for Austin's career or for the fans' emotional investment. But despite it being short, the win at Survivor Series marked a turning point. Reclaiming that championship symbolised his resilience and tenacity. It endeared him to more fans, and it paved the way for his rise to main event status. And it was the setup to McMahon-Austin. The championship run for Austin was short. He threw the title into the river in a storyline with The Rock, helping to elevate The Rock, setting him on a path to stardom and establishing the lasting rivalry between the two. The 1997 Survivor Series, whether it was meant to or not, became this key moment, this key point in the careers of both Austin and Dwayne Johnson. Austin's defiance against authority propelling him towards WrestleMania and that first championship run. And let's be honest, it may not have been a technical masterpiece, but its significance was enormous. It was the start of Austin's climb to the top. It was the start of Austin being the biggest name ever. And it was these undercard matches that set the stage for a night of rivalry, raw power, and emerging talent, which all led up to that main event between Bret The Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels. And when we come back, we are gonna be touching on it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is why we are here. We'll see you after this.
In the end, his actions spoke volumes. Let's cut right to the chase. 7 days ago at the Survivor Series, did you or did you not screw Bret Hart?
Some would say I screwed Bret Hart. Bret Hart would definitely tell you I screwed him. I look at it from a different standpoint. I look at it from a standpoint of the referee did not screw Bret Hart. Shawn Michaels certainly did not screw Bret Hart. Nor did Vince McMahon screw Bret Hart. I truly believe that Bret Hart screwed Bret Hart. And he can look in the mirror and know that.
And there you go. You heard it from the horse's mouth there. Vince McMahon. Bret screwed Bret. So even though we have talked about the card, to understand Survivor Series, we need to go back a little and look at the real life feud between the Hitman and the Heartbreak Kid. And Bret and Shawn, as we know, two of the biggest stars in WWE, not only at the time, but ever. But boy, they couldn't have been any more different. Bret, the excellence of execution, known for the technical prowess, the work ethic, the loyalty to the traditional values of professional wrestling. Shawn Michaels, the young, brash, rebellious, willing to push boundaries both on and off of the screen. They'd clashed multiple times. Silly comments, like Shawn's infamous Sunny Days comment about the Hitman Bret Hart, which implied that he had an affair. Now that crossed a line for Bret. That led to real animosity. The rivalry they had went beyond their characters. It became personal, and it kept growing with every match and with every promo. And then you've got to think of Bret's WCW contract. Back in 1996, Vince McMahon offered the Hitman a 20-year contract, a lifetime deal to keep him in the WWE. But by 1997, the WWE were in financial difficulty. They were going bankrupt. They were losing to WCW. They were losing the Monday Night War. Talent was jumping ship. Bischoff was doing dirty tactics like taking a championship and dropping it into a trash can. And the WWE needed to cut costs by any means necessary. And Vince told Bret that he couldn't honour that 20-year contract. In fact, he went so far to encourage Bret to see if WCW could give him a better deal, which led to Bret to sign with the competition. And that is where things get complicated, because the Hitman still had to drop the title before leaving. And as part of his contract, he had creative control over his last 30 days. Bret has made it very clear throughout the years. You know, I've spoken to Bret, Mike's spoken to Bret, Mike knows Bret. It's been on countless interviews, it's been on documentaries, that he was willing to drop the title. He was willing to do business. But what he wasn't willing to do was to drop it to Shawn in Montreal. He didn't want to lose in Canada. He especially didn't want to lose in Canada to Shawn Michaels, who he legitimately couldn't stand. And it was this one action that created a perfect storm of tension that had been brewing for years. Now, the WWE creative team knew the main event was going to be hot. It was going to be hot for the fans, and it was going to be hot for the superstars involved. Bret was playing this anti-American heel in the US while being a hero in Canada. Michaels had his own antagonistic persona, and he went to town, making the crowd just hate the dude and become even more hostile towards him. But it was on November the 9th, 1997, in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, where all of those storylines came together. The question was who would leave the Survivor Series and how. So now we come to the main event. Bret the Hitman Hart versus Shawn Michaels. When you watch that pay-per-view back, when you watch that match, I think you can just imagine what it would have been like to have been sat in that arena. Excuse me. The air was thick with tension. The two superstars took the fight outside the ring right from the get-go, brawling through the crowd, taking that feud to the next level. The atmosphere was electric. You could cut it with a knife. But as we know, the ending would be unlike anything we as wrestling fans had ever seen before or again. As Shawn put Bret in the sharpshooter, a move Bret mastered himself, referee Earl Hebner, the senior official for the WWF, called for the bell, ending the match, even though the Hitman hadn't tapped out. That was the Screwjob. Now, the Montreal Screwjob might not be a classic in terms of pure wrestling, but its impact and its drama made it unforgettable. Meltzer gave it 3.5 stars. Its legacy, though, is something that goes far beyond star ratings. When that bell rang, the wrestling world as we knew it changed forever. Fans in the arena were shocked. The locker room was shocked. Bret spat directly at Vince McMahon at ringside, went on a rampage backstage, reportedly knocking Vince out in a heated confrontation. The locker room backstage was divided. Wrestlers loyal to Bret, such as Mick Foley, felt betrayed. The Undertaker, a locker room leader, was furious with McMahon and wanted answers. Others, like Hunter Hearst Helmsley, stood by Vince, saying that Bret had refused to do business the way that Vince wanted. But perhaps the most lasting effect of Montreal was the birth of the on-screen Mr. McMahon character. McMahon embraced it. He embraced being the villain who screwed Bret, and he went on to become quite possibly the biggest heel in professional wrestling, especially in that feud with Austin that helped launch the Attitude Era. As for Bret, though, the move to WCW wasn't successful. They never used him to his full potential, and he was caught in the politics of a poorly managed organisation. I mean, they had Vince Russo, for God's sake. The WWE went on to dominate the Monday Night Wars. They became the powerhouse. They capitalised on the Screwjob. And it would take over a decade for the Hitman and Vince McMahon to reconcile. Bret eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame, appeared on television, and even faced Vince at WrestleMania 26. And that moment was huge for fans who had followed Bret's career and the legacy of the Montreal Screwjob. It's interesting when you think about where we go now with professional wrestling. And it's intriguing when you think about what wrestling would look like now. So let's find out. I'm going to hand over right now to my conversation with Mike McGuire. I'll see you after this. Welcome back to Legends and Champions, and we've been to break. We've been talking all the way through the show about the 1997 Survivor Series, and I thought, what better way to talk about the most controversial moment of Survivor Series than by getting the man himself, the head honcho of McGuire on Wrestling. He is DJ extraordinaire. He is the master of the microphone. It's Mike McGuire. Mike, how you doing, big man?
Stop it. Just stop it. I'm doing great, Andy. How are you?
I'm good. And welcome to Legends, your first appearance on Legends.
But first one in conversation. Yeah, we were on, Joe and I did a segment for you, I think on, what was it, the first or second show? But yeah, first time actually hanging out with you on your show here. Thanks for being a part of the feed here. And I'm very interested to see what your entire take on Survivor Series 97 has been so far. So.
Well, you'll find out when the episode is released. So we are currently taping this out of order. It's a little bit different. I've done the show, and I'm currently sat in a hotel room speaking to Mike at 9:30 UK time, which is about 2:30 Canadian time. You finished for the day. You're ready to go home, and I'm making you stay in the studio. So
can I ask you, what kind of a hotel are you in? Because for those listening, you can't see, but there's like a very backlit headboard there. It's like a turquoise sort of, this is, we haven't really established what you do for a living on the air. So, just feel free to guess wildly, anybody listening, what Andy might do. But
it's very vanilla. My job, I'm a trainer. Let's put it out that way. Not a trainer. Yeah. I'm sure. I'm just digging a hole now. I'm in a hotel called the Premier Inn, and
you got to train people up to whatever their requirements are. Is what you're saying?
Basically, I'm just get me out of this hole. Seriously, get me out of this hole because you're not helping me out here at all.
That's not the first time that's said during your training either. But anyway,
I kind of asked you not to mention that on air. It's that Joe.
All right.
It's that Joe Agronaldo. You can't trust him to take anything quiet, can you? There you go.
No. Well, he did do that wonderful weather jingle for you, which is spot on. So
absolutely perfect, which is now part of the show. Anyway, we're digressing.
Yes.
Survivor Series 1997. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about Montreal. We didn't talk about the Screwjob, Bret the Hitman Hart, Shawn Michaels. You are a lifelong Hitman fan. You work for Dungeon Wrestling.
Yeah.
What does Montreal mean to you? What do you think the Screwjob means to you?
It's funny. I remember being younger watching that. I would probably just had turned 18, I think. So, still a kid really in the retrospective of the world. And I wasn't as tuned in to the business, as I would become later in life, obviously. And I wasn't smartened up to a lot of things. So I remember as it all went down, and the word that Bret was going to WCW had trickled out, I was like, maybe this isn't a thing. Maybe they're all wrong. Maybe it's not going to be the case. So when everything went down the way it did, if you look at it objectively, it would have been a great way to set up a new angle with Bret and Shawn. Like, it would have been a fantastic way to set up a new angle with Bret and Shawn. But of course, we knew that wasn't the case. Bret was actually leaving, and what happened. But I remember even leading up to it, like these guys had always been on opposite ends of the ring of each other and had always put on stellar matches. It's funny, we're talking about 97, but go back to Survivor Series 92, where it's Bret and Shawn, champion versus champion. Coincidentally enough, this is also a champion versus champion match. Let's not forget, Shawn Michaels, at the time, the European champion. So, still a title holder. But, well, hey, man, I didn't put it on him. But the bottom line is they were still almost in a carbon copy situation, only there was a lot more emotion and a lot more happening behind the scenes than it was just 5 years prior with the same two guys in the main event.
And also, if you think about, not a year, maybe 18 months earlier, it was WrestleMania 12. It was the Iron Man match where Shawn beat Bret in overtime. You've been around the block, Mike. You've been a wrestling fan for a number of years, and obviously you host the number one wrestling radio show out there in podcast land at the moment. I'm saying it.
You're gravely overestimating, but thank you. I mean, I like to think we all put in a solid effort, but yeah.
I'm taking it. Did you ever think legitimately it was a work? Did you think that, Bret was in on it?
I mean, and not knowing what we know now, obviously, I mean, I just said, I legit thought that was a perfect way to say, no, Bret's staying, because obviously he's got to get his revenge on Shawn Michaels and whatever Vince McMahon is doing involved in this, because we didn't know Vince McMahon to be Vince McMahon then. So if you're watching it just as a fan, you're just as confused as everybody else. And if you don't know all the inside dirt, and if you're not getting the Observer, and if you're not calling hotlines and everything else, you really don't know what's happening. But, I mean, it was quite adamant that something was going down. And so at that time, I legit thought that it could be part of an angle. Now, again, getting up, growing older, seeing all the stories, seeing all the interviews, and I've sat literally like feet from Bret as he talks about it. And not in an interview standpoint, but even just with friends of his and everything else. And, it's funny, we would always think that Bret would just be negative and rags on everything. He's not that guy. He's the guy that if you ask him about a negative situation, he's going to give you a negative answer. But it was funny. He was talking about good times that he had with Shawn and everything else. And then somebody asked him that exact question, so was it all set up? And he goes, no, it wasn't. And so that, I mean, if you can't take it from the horse's mouth there, and Bret is the most honest guy, like, love or hate it, when it comes to telling you what's gone on in life. I knew then for sure it wasn't a work. So
how do you think it's changed the wrestling landscape now? Because, I mean, it's 1997, it's 2024. We're still talking about it. Wrestling fans are still talking about that night in Montreal, Quebec.
I don't know. And with all due respect to your show and what you've done, because, I mean, your show is a fantastic recap of general broad strokes of history, and then you zone in on certain events like you did with Survivor Series here. And I appreciate the fact that you went through more than just this part of the show, because there's a lot of stuff that happened. Nobody remembers anything else that happened on that show.
No, it was hard.
If you go to recall anything, it's like, huh? But no, nobody remembers any of it because it all just goes kablooey at the end. But the reason why I think fans talk about it now, outside of really deep dives like what you're doing now, I think is almost a lack of creativity. And again, that's not to speak of what you're doing here. Again, this is a totally different version of it. I think that it was such a hot thing to talk about for so long. Nobody bought any explanation for it. Everybody knew that it was set up to be something. And, everything that shook down from it, well, there'd be no Attitude Era without the Screwjob. Yeah, there probably would have been. I don't know how well Bret would have fit into that landscape, to be 100% honest. I still think he would have fit in better to that than he did WCW. But, that really was a catalyst for the reinvention of wrestling presentation on TV, and it getting grittier and it getting more inside baseball. And all of a sudden, as websites start to grow, as newsletters start to transition to online, there's all these web chat shows now starting to pop up. And this is all still brand new to a lot of folks at the time. But man, did it ever take what we knew the perception of pro wrestling to be and kind of knock it on its ear.
It kind of took because, I've done a show on 1994 and talking about the Survivor Series 94 and the year that was in the WWF. And I remember doing that show and talking about the new era, the new generation of the WWE, where, Hogan's gone, Savage is gone. It's now Bret, it's Shawn, it's The Undertaker. And it's not doing as well as it did back in the 80s and the early 90s. I interviewed Bret back in, I think it was 2007 on the original TSC, the original Squared Circle. And I remember asking Bret and saying to him, what is your take on the Attitude Era? And Bret basically went along the lines of saying, I don't like it. I don't think it's a good fit for what professional wrestling is. You've kind of referenced it there as well.
Yep.
Do you think the Attitude Era in the WWE in 1998 onwards would have been as successful if they hadn't have done the Montreal Screwjob?
Oof. The safest answer, and I don't say safe because I'm worried about what people think of what I say, but I think, like, if you were to make a safest guess here, if the Screwjob didn't happen, they would have had to do something similar to that to make it happen.
Yeah.
I don't think that the raw nerves would have been exposed as much as they were in fan psyche if the Screwjob hadn't happened. And if all the fallout that came from that afterwards hadn't happened, I don't think that we would be questioning as much. This is like when Stone Cold would be fired 100 times by Vince McMahon and on Raw, and he'd be back the next hour in some cases.
Yeah.
But I think when it's something real and something that cuts that deep and it takes away the illusion of pro wrestling and everything is, well, they're clearly on the fix on this. And like I said, I was the fan that said back in the day, oh yeah, this means Bret's staying. This must mean Bret's staying because he's got to get his, and it didn't happen. And that's when I realized, oh man, this is something different. This was new. So I think that it probably still would have happened, to be honest with you. I think that, and even if Bret had stayed, I think Bret would have had to stay like a monster heel.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way he could have survived in an Attitude Era, was to be that moral compass and be the guy saying everything that nobody wanted to hear, So I don't know. I don't know what would have happened, but I don't think it would have been as successful, at least off the hop, without it.
Now, that's an interesting take there, because you've referenced the heel turn of the Hitman Bret Hart. So you've talked about the Hart Foundation. He got back together with Owen, with the Bulldog, with Jim Neidhart. Then they did that whole, I will support the UK fans and I will support the Canadian fans and the German fans and Indian fans, but I will, poo-poo over American fans, right?
Right.
As a Canadian, as a Hitman longtime fan, how did that resonate with you? Because I always had issues with that character of Bret Hart. I always thought that, as a youngster, I think I was, 16, 17, around that sort of time, when that angle happened.
Yep.
And I always kind of sat there and went, this isn't the Bret Hart that I know. This isn't the Bret Hart that I grew up watching as a fan. Did it resonate with you? Did you think it was a good move for the company to do, for Bret to do?
I can't speak for on the company. I mean, they felt it was good business. Bret came up with the idea, basically. And overall, I mean, you're asking me as a Canadian fan growing up, so I was on the right side of history. You know what I mean? As far as cheering Bret Hart went. So, yeah, exactly. So you're fine too. It didn't bother me that much. I found it a little hard to believe sometimes that he felt the way he felt about Americans, the way he was talking about them,
Yeah.
And I think, what was it in, it was Wrestling with Shadows, didn't he say, where he wasn't really thrilled about the stick the enema in the right here line,
Yeah.
if wherever they were. And, I mean, yeah, some of it was pretty campy, pretty cheesy stuff that was a little hard to take, because he would also work as a heel more and not knowing what that meant as a kid, just noticing that something wasn't right,
Yeah.
He wasn't wrestling quite the same. And it's funny, we did a special here on the podcast network a little while ago on Leo Burke, who of course was one of Bret's influences, major influence on his wrestling career. And Bret told me flat out that he always found it hard to watch Leo wrestle as a heel because there was this mentality that once you turned heel, you just forgot how to wrestle. You know, you wrestled poorly and you'd run around and you just, you know, get beat up all the time. And that was one thing that Bret never really did as a heel. He never made dumb mistakes as a heel. You know, he never had those woohoo gotcha moments, and he would still wrestle like he knew how to wrestle. So that, I think, kept me on board with Bret Hart still being Bret Hart. But, you know, a lot of the things he said, yeah, I could see taken away from the original character. So
it was just intriguing to watch, you know, because obviously doing this show, I go back and watch a lot of the stuff on the network until the end of December. Please keep it on Netflix. You know, I don't know what's going to happen, but please keep it on Netflix. And it is just really weird seeing this differentiation of the Hitman Bret Hart. I mean, you work with him in Dungeon Wrestling. Has he, and you know him pretty well, without putting words in his mouth, has he ever said to you anything along the lines that he regrets it, or that, you know, looking back on it now, 20, 25 years later, he wouldn't have done it?
You mean like leaving, or?
No, doing the heel angle before we get.
Oh no. You know, it's funny. We've never talked about it.
Really?
No, and that's the thing. Like, you would think, and when we first met, like way back in the day, it was kind of that. You know, you get all your fanboy questions out, but now when I see him, we're usually talking present day about whatever, and very rarely is it even wrestling. You know, we're talking about like food and stuff, or what's going on at our show that night, or, you know, just trying to convey what an angle should be, you know, and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I've never done a deep dive with him on that because I figure he's done enough interviews with people like you and other people throughout the life that I'm not here to interview you, man. We're working. We're here to chat and hang out and have some laughs and you know, I'll drink weird things because I will be that guy that I'll have what he's having. And so, like, last time we went to the post show, I think he was doing tequila on a giant cube of ice.
Okay.
I think that's what it was. Yeah. And I was like, I hate tequila, but I'll have what he's having. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't think he's ever expressed regretting doing it anywhere. I mean, you know, sometimes it was probably hard to carry. And I know it made going to WCW a bit of a struggle at start because they even tried to push, you know, just kidding. He's loved America all along, you know, so.
But then, you know, in all fairness, WCW booked him so well that.
Oh, yeah. No, it was probably the best end to anybody's career ever.
Yeah. At least Goldberg didn't ask for Bret to be his end of the ring. I'm not going. I'm not going down that route.
We're not mentioning the G word.
Shoot.
Although I will say this: #GoldDom, #Domberg.
Oh no! I kind of want to see that. I don't know why, but I really do want to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
I really want to see it. That's got to be anyway. Back to Survivor Series.
That's the campaign right now. We need to get it to Paul Levesque. Right.
I know.
We need GoldDom.
I'm trying my heart. If you're listening to this show right now, tag Triple H, tag Goldberg, tag me, tag Andy, #McGuire on Wrestling, #Team MOW, and #GoldDom, or #Domberg. Either way, I think they're both universally lovable.
We will do this. ACT, chaps, you need to get on this as well. Anyway, we really are going off the subject. 24 hours later from Survivor Series was Monday Night Raw. And they brought out the midget of Bret Hart, right?
The little person, yes.
The little person. I mean, that was a kind of a staple of what was going to happen going forward in the Attitude Era. But did that push the envelope too far, in your opinion?
At that point, no. At that point, I mean, honestly, that's pro wrestling. That's classic bait and switch. That's classic heel stuff. That's heat.
Yeah.
That is more pro wrestling than what happened the night before Survivor Series. What happened at Survivor Series up until, or as soon as Vince McMahon walked out, it was no longer pro wrestling.
Yeah.
It was literally a guy getting his belt back from the guy that was leaving his company. And I'm not talking about Shawn. I'm talking about Vince, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, You could argue it was pro wrestling in the sense that maybe they had, I don't think it was a grandiose plan. I don't think it was like, I'll tell you what, then I'll become evil. No, it's not. I think it was a giant fluke in a lot of ways, but it's a fluke they capitalized on. The bringing out the little guy with the Bret Hart mask on afterwards and all that, that's pro wrestling.
Yeah.
That's what this is going to happen. Really? He's still there? And then of course, what happens, and that's heat. So I don't blame Shawn for that or even Vince for that, because that again is, they knew they had to say something. They knew they had to do something. They were already doing the Bret screwed Bret. So, I mean, we might as well go full bore on this. And so that's TV. I don't think anybody saw that more than what it was.
Okay, so last couple of things, and then I'm going to let you go and go home and get some sleep.
That's fine.
Who came off better out of Montreal? Bret, Shawn, or Vince?
Depends on which way you look at it, honestly. And I mean, I would say this to Bret's face, so I'll say it here. I think Bret had every right to be upset. I think Bret had every right to be angry. I think Bret had every right to be disappointed. And I do think Bret was lied to. Yeah. Because he was. That's the bottom line. They say, yeah, we'll do the schmoz, we'll do the whatever, and that's it. There's no disputing that. Nobody's ever said that's not how it happened, right? So Bret had every right to feel the way he feels. People say, oh, why couldn't you just get over it? Dude, he did get over it. He's still affiliated with the company today, I think of all the other crap that's gone on with him and his family and everything else. Like, I mean, he's over the screw job. He doesn't care anymore, Shawn, you got to say, tremendous respect for that guy in a lot of ways. I don't know the person behind Shawn Michaels. I never have. But again, if Bret, the guy who has the biggest problem with him at the time, can let it go, then that's the answer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Shawn actually, last time he was in Calgary, actually got cheered for the first time ever. There wasn't a "you screwed Bret," and it was like, what happened? I remember being at that show, and I was like, this is crazy. And I think, was that the Bret Hart Appreciation Night? I don't remember, but anyway, so we're all over it. It's fine.
Yeah.
And to a degree, and trust me, this is not saying Vince McMahon's a great person in any way whatsoever. I don't agree with it. I don't like it, but Vince did what he felt he had to do for his company to save his title. Remember, he was the one that he was, and I don't care who you are. You can argue, it was the women's championship. That's still got a sting, man.
Oh, yeah.
You see your championship thrown in the garbage on the competition's TV, that's got a sting. So you're not risking that for anything, even though I feel he could have trusted Bret. But then what does that do for the title if Bret just walks away from it? Right. I understand all this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
so who came out the best? I mean, honestly, I think it's a 3-way tie. Like, and that sounds like the ultimate fence sitter here, but honestly, if you look at it from those three perspectives, I don't know if anybody really came out glowing in this entire thing.
If you put your fantasy booker hat on for a second, it's something that I hate doing, but I'm just going to do it now, just for a second. If you put your fantasy booker hat on, Montreal hadn't happened. Bret hadn't signed with WCW. He hadn't been told by Vince to get out the contract. This is how you're going to do it. This is how you're going to get to WCW. None of that had happened.
Right.
Where do you think Bret would have gone in the WWE?
Again, I think he would have had a heck of a heel run. I think he may have eventually even called it for a while as a career of his own accord. I think he probably had another solid, like, pretend none of the other bad stuff happened, like Owen's fine. Everything's, nothing bad had happened. And again, I've never asked him this either. Maybe he's answered it somewhere else, but I think he probably had another 5 years or so. He was willing to go. And I mean, he had signed a 20-year deal, right? He didn't want to go anywhere. He loves, and I see this at Dungeon Wrestling every show, he loves working with guys on figuring out their matches, on how to tell the story in their match. You know, I saw him take a well-known wrestler and tell him to change his finish that night. You know, this is an established wrestler, and he told the guy, "You're going to change your finish tonight, and here's why: because you're better. You'd look better doing this." I don't know if it worked out as well as they had hoped, but I mean, people are willing to try because they know he knows. It's not always going to work, but a lot of times it's going to work. So I think that even if he had stayed on with the company and not wrestled, he would have had some sort of either backstage role, training, something like that, because he does love passing the knowledge on. So, and then maybe he would have come back for one of these big finale matches we're seeing everybody do these days, you know?
Where do you think Shawn would have gone? Because this moment in some ways helped to establish Shawn. That was the big controversial moment for him. Forget the title wins. He kind of sailed on after that. Where do you think he would have gone?
Well, I think if Shawn was, it would depend. If there was still the resentment between the two.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that plays a big factor in it. We also know that Shawn had a lot of problems at that time in his life. So, I mean, I would hope that he still would have gotten straightened out the way he did, you know, and got cleaned up and figured out how to live his life, you know, without having to rely on so many extra stimulants and pills and whatnot just to cope. But God, you know, I still live in this world where, you know, the Bret Hart Shawn Michaels feud, I don't think lasted long enough. And that's funny because it really literally lasted almost their entire WWF careers, from the Rockers and Hart Foundation all the way up to Survivor Series 97. But I think they could have been that classic feud.
Yeah.
That could have been the Flair Steamboat, you know what I mean? Because they can both go. They'd both know how to modify if one slowed down and the other didn't, whatever. You know, and they were both so good against each other in the ring. So I think if you're to go more into it just for the two of them, and I know you're asking more Shawn than Bret at this point, but I think that could have been the course.
Yeah.
So, but we'll never know.
And we won't. And that's the unfortunate thing about this whole thing, because obviously, you know, following Survivor Series, Bret left, went to WCW. Shawn went on his path. Vince went down his path. And that was it, really, up until that fateful night on Monday Night Raw, the same night as TNA Impact went to Monday nights, that Bret and Shawn reunited in the middle of that squared circle and kind of made bygones be bygones. And of course, one of the things that unfortunately you can no longer watch now is that Rivalries DVD that they released, the Bret versus Shawn, where they literally sat talking about it. And I think if you talk about closure, that DVD or that sitting, that filming session, that must have been closure for both Bret and Shawn.
Oh God! At one point, there's a blooper going around online where Bret's asking Shawn about his googly eye, you know, and he's like, "So how did that happen?" So yeah, I mean, like I said, I think they're both over it. I think any fans that, for some reason, dear God, in 2024 aren't over it, like, you gotta let it go, man. Like the principles involved are over it. Like it's not your problem. It's not your cross to bear, you know. So
yeah. Where does it sit in the all-time greatest controversies in professional wrestling? Where do you think it sits?
Number 2.
What's number 1? I'm intrigued.
We're living in it right now, thanks to a certain now former owner of WWE.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Wasn't going to go there, but fair enough.
Well, I'm not going to go there either. But that, you know, honestly, as far as longevity and people talking about it to this day, name another. Even other screw jobs that happen in wrestling. You know, nobody ever talked about the Wendy Richter screw job the way they talk about Bret and Shawn.
No,
right?
It's a very good point.
With Moolah. Like, nobody's talked about any of these other ones where people, you know, I mean, people had brought up the time that Scott Hall ate the pin in WCW, right? Because he wanted the other guy to go over, Chico, and whatever. It's nobody talked about anything the way people talked about Bret and Shawn. And the only other, you know, the only other ones are between Vince McMahon and I think Hogan and Gawker, you know, like that's, but as far as wrestling, it's Screwjob all the way.
Mike, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on to Legends to talk about the Montreal Screwjob between Bret and Shawn. A different take on it. That's what we wanted on this show.
Just before I go, Andy, I got to say, this Legends and Champions show you are doing and putting together, it is a treat to listen to. You know, there's a lot of people that cover a lot of wrestling retro content. You know, there's a lot of guys that were there that did it, but I think you bring a fun flavor to it. I really do enjoy listening to the show. I listen to all our shows, but I also firmly believe that we do something special here on our little podcast feed, and you're a big part of that. So thank you for your efforts in these shows, because they're fantastic.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks for having me on the network. It's great to be here with you and with Mitch and Dimitri and Joe. As much as the ACT don't like the Blackpool Combat Club, I'm letting it go. I'm dropping it. I'm dropping.
I can tell you're over it. Yeah,
I'm dropping it. What if I ever see him?
It's the day of release. No, we're over the screw job. We're over the rivalries. It's all good.
Mike, check out Mike every Sunday on McGuire on Wrestling on podcast. You can search for it just like you do with all of our podcasts by searching McGuire on Wrestling or McGuireOnWrestling.com. You can join Team MOW as well. Mike, always a pleasure. Every Sunday, Dave Meltzer, the top 5, the latest wrestling news, the latest wrestling hotlines. I'm loving the show. It's fantastic. If you want to go yay boo, it's a yay from me, and we will see you every Sunday. We're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, it's wrap-up time. We're going to tell you what's coming up next week. It's a bit of a different one. Let's just say I love it when a plan comes together. We'll see you after this.
If you like McGuire on Wrestling, you need to subscribe to the free McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed. Not only do you get access to the show a day early, but you also get free bonus content every week. Share a laugh with Mitch and Dimitri on the alternate commentary table.
Oh, I'm Cody Brown. Look at me.
Now, if this was Damian Priest, he'd apologize.
He probably would have apologized.
Follow along with the film career of one of wrestling's biggest stars with We've Seen a Movie.
Basically, I'm just watching John Cena play his wrestling character.
If John Cena was a raging alcoholic Atlantic City mooch before this.
Get all these shows, exclusive interviews, and more for free by subscribing to McGuire on Wrestling, wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, welcome back to Legends and Champions. My big thanks go out to Mike McGuire, who joined me for that 40-minute monster of a conversation, talking all about the Montreal Screwjob. I was fascinated by that conversation, and you know, I love having Mike on the show because we kind of go off on different tangents and everything else, but it was interesting to take his perspective from a fan going through to now. Because what is interesting is that, you know, even now, 2024, fans still debate whether or not Vince was justified. Was Bret stubborn? Did Shawn know about it ahead of time? The Screwjob really did blur the lines between reality and storytelling, which I don't think even we realised how much that was going to set the tone for what would come next. Back in 1997, fans were split. Some sided with Vince, arguing he had to protect the title. Others saw it as a betrayal of trust. And even now, the debate continues, with the Screwjob remaining one of the most discussed events in wrestling history. And that is the story of the 1997 Survivor Series, the night that changed wrestling. The Screwjob that brought real-life drama into the ring set the tone for the future. Was Vince right to do it? Could Bret have handled things differently? Let us know what you think. Join the conversation on social media at Team MOW on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe for more of this. More conversations on wrestling's greatest moments. But not only listening to me, but joining Mitch and Dimitri every Saturday for the alternate commentary table, being a part of that Greek world order. To join Mike every Sunday for McGuire on Wrestling with Dave Meltzer. To join Mike and Joe for I Seen a Movie. And, yes, to join me on Legends and Champions. It's a pleasure doing this show. I really enjoy doing it, and I hope you guys enjoy listening to it as much as I do making it, and as much as all of the guys here at McGuire on Wrestling who put these content out, these shows out for you. We do it because we love it, and we do it because we love you guys. Join us on Facebook at Team MOW, like I said. Be a part of the conversation. And all that's left for me to say right now is I will see you very soon. Take care. I will see you at the matches. Bye-bye now.
This has been Legends and Champions with Andy Evans. Thank you for listening.